The sound wasn't a shout. It was a tear. The sharp, unmistakable sound of fabric ripping, followed by a collective, horrified gasp from a room full of the city's elite. Every phone, every fork, every whispered conversation stopped. All eyes locked onto the center of the restaurant, where Seraphil Reed, girlfriend of a tech CEO, held a piece of a waitress's black uniform in her clenched fist. The waitress Emir stood frozen, her dress torn from shoulder to hip, her skin exposed to the cold, judgmental air of the exclusive dining room. Seraphil sneered. "That's what you get, trash." But she had no idea that the boss she was about to meet wasn't the restaurant manager. It was the woman she had just humiliated. Aura was not merely a restaurant, it was a statement. Tucked away on a cobblestone street in a historic district, it had no sign, only a single, polished brass A on a door of ancient, dark wood. To dine there, you didn't just need money, you needed a name. The waiting list was rumored to be 2 years long, unless, of course, you were personally known to the mysterious owner, a figure shrouded in financial legend. Inside, it was a cathedral of quiet wealth. Soft light glowed from crystal fixtures, illuminating tables set with heavy silverware and hand-blown glasses. The clientele was a curated collection of senators, old money heirs, and the new gods of tech and media. They spoke in hushed tones, the clinking of their glasses, the only sharp sound in a room muffled by velvet and ambition. And serving them, moving with an impossible, silent grace, was Emir Vance. To the patrons, she was invisible, a functional part of the exquisite machinery. 27, with intelligent, observant eyes and dark hair pulled back into a severe but elegant bun, she wore the simple, perfectly tailored black dress of the Aura staff. She was, by all appearances, just a waitress. Her colleague, Somi, a younger woman with a perpetually nervous flutter in her hands, bumped into her by the service station. "Table 7 is a nightmare," Somi whispered, her eyes wide. "He says the glacier water tastes too processed." "What does that even mean?" Emir simply took the bottle of water from Somi's trembling hand. "I'll handle it, Somi. You take table 4. They're lovely." "You're a lifesaver, Em," Somi breathed, rushing off. Emir approached table 7. A man in a suit that probably cost more than a mid-sized car looked up, his face a mask of practiced disdain. "I asked for fresh," he snapped. Emir didn't apologize. She simply inclined her head. "A understandable palate, sir. The processed taste you're detecting is likely the faint ozonic trace from the bottling facility's purification system. Perhaps you'd prefer the Icelandic Spring instead. It has a softer, less mineral-forward profile." The man's disdain faltered, replaced by a flicker of surprise. "Yes," he said, thrown off balance. "Yes, that will do." Emir glided away. This was her 3rd week working the floor. This restaurant, Aura, was her flagship, her baby. She had designed the menu, approved the velvet for the chairs, and interviewed the chef herself. But no one here knew that. To the staff, she was just Imaya, the new hire who learned impossibly fast and never panicked. To the world, she was EV Capital, a ghost, a name on a Forbes list, the Vance in equations of power, the woman who could make or break global corporations with a single phone call. She was working here because she couldn't stand the sterile silence of her boardroom. She needed to see the why, to understand her businesses from the ground up, from the polished floor to the balance sheets. She needed to know if the foundations were real. At 8:02 p.m. the heavy door opened again. The restaurant manager, Davis, a man known for his unflappable composure, visibly stiffened. In walked Seraphil Reed. She was a vision of artificial perfection, poured into a skin-tight, scarlet Valentino dress. Her blonde hair was a miracle of engineering, and her diamonds were bright enough to be obnoxious. She clung to the arm of Matthew Thorne. Matthew was the man of the hour in the tech world. CEO of Thorne Dynamics, his face had been on Wired and Time. He was handsome, shark-eyed, and currently visibly stressed. He was tapping at his phone, a furrow in his brow, paying little attention to Seraphiel. "A table by the window, Davis," Seraphiel commanded. Not asked, she didn't have a reservation. "Ms. Reed, a pleasure," Davis said, his voice smooth. "All of our window tables are reserved this evening. However, I have a beautiful discreet table for you right here." Seraphiel's lip curled. "Discreet? I don't want discreet. I want to be seen. Don't you know who he is?" She jabbed a lacquered nail toward Matthew. Matthew looked up, annoyed. "Tiff, it's fine. Whatever." "It's not fine," she hissed. She looked around, her eyes landing on an elderly couple seated at the best table, quietly sharing a dessert. "They look like they're about to die." "Move them." Davis paled. "Ma'am, I absolutely cannot." "Fine," Seraphiel snapped, and without waiting, she stalked toward the very center of the dining room, taking the most prominent, most central, and most visible table, one reserved for a senator who was due in 10 minutes. She sat, flinging her $30,000 Birkin bag onto the spare chair. Davis looked at Emir, his eyes screaming for help. Emir gave a subtle, almost imperceptible nod. "I'll take them." This was her station. Emir picked up 2 menus, took a deep, centering breath, and began the short walk toward the table. She felt the atmosphere shift. It was no longer a calm, gilded cage. A predator had entered, and the air was thick with the scent of drama. Emir felt a familiar, cold dread. She had dealt with 1,000 Seraphiels in her life, in boardrooms, at charity galas, and now, it seemed, in her own restaurant. She plastered on the trained, neutral smile of the service industry. "Good evening. My name is Amaya, and I will be your server." Seraphiel didn't even look up. She was busy taking a selfie, pouting her lips. "Get me a champagne, the best one, and don't be slow." Matthew finally put his phone down, his eyes scanning the room, looking for someone. He seemed preoccupied, jumpy. "And a sparkling water for me," he said, distracted. "Right away," Emir said, her voice a calm, smooth stone in the bubbling vat of Seraphiel's arrogance. The night was just beginning. The next hour was a masterclass in psychological warfare, with Seraphiel Reed as its grand marshal. It began with the champagne. Emir returned with a bottle of Salon 9999, one of the finest in the cellar. "An excellent choice," Emir said, presenting the bottle. Seraphiel waved her hand dismissively. "Just pour it, and make sure it's cold. The last place we went, the glass was practically hot." Emir poured the champagne. Seraphiel took a sip and made a face. "It's fine." She turned to Matthew. "Are you even listening to me, Matthew? I was telling you about what Melinda said at the polo match. She's getting another Tesla, the new Model X. I think I should get one. In white." Matthew nodded, his eyes darting to the restaurant entrance every few seconds. "Yeah, sure, Tiff. We'll look at it." His mind was clearly elsewhere. He was waiting for someone. Someone important. He had a 10-figure funding round on the line, one that depended entirely on the approval of the most reclusive and powerful investor in the country, EV Capital. He had a meeting with their representative tomorrow, but he'd heard a rumor their primary board member, a man named Arthur Harrison, was dining in the city tonight. He'd hoped to run into him, to make a casual impression. "And this lighting is just ghastly," Seraphiel continued, pulling out a compact mirror. "It's giving me shadows. Can't you do something about the lighting?" "Ma'am, The lighting is set for the evening's ambiance, Emir replied politely. It's awful. It makes me look old, Seraphil snapped. And this music, what is this? Depressed ghosts playing the violin? Put on something with a beat. This place is a morgue. I can assure you the senator at the next table appreciates the quiet, Emir said, her voice still level, though the smile was gone. This, it seemed, was the wrong thing to say. Seraphil's eyes, a cold, pale blue, finally locked onto Emir. She looked her up and down, a slow, appraising glance that was designed to diminish. The senator. Oh, I see. Seraphil let out a short, cruel laugh. And what are you? The little helper? You must get so excited, being in a room with people like this. It must be the highlight of your sad little life, getting to breathe the same air as us. Emir felt a familiar sting. She'd heard variations of this her whole life. Before she'd made her first billion, she was the scholarship kid. Before that, the charity case. The clothes changed, but the sneer from people like Seraphil was always the same. I enjoy my work, ma'am, Emir said. Your work, Seraphil scoffed. You pour water. It's not exactly a career, is it, Emir? I'll bet you're one of those aspiring actresses. Or artist. Let me guess. You have a headshot in your dirty apron, just waiting to hand it to one of the producers at table 9? Matthew finally interjected, though weakly. Seraphil, be nice. She's just doing her job. I am being nice, Seraphil said, her voice rising, drawing the attention of the surrounding tables. I'm just making an observation. People should aim higher, that's all. Instead of this. She gestured around at Emir's uniform, at the service station, at the very concept of a job. Emir's training, both in the boardroom and now on the floor, was to de-escalate. May I take your food order, or would you like more time? We'll order when I'm ready, Seraphil snapped. Now go, you're hovering, it's distracting. Emir nodded once and retreated. She went to the service station, her hands perfectly steady as she poured water for another table. How are you doing that? Somi whispered, arriving to grab a fresh basket of bread. She's a monster. I'd be in the back crying. She's just a person, Somi, Emir said quietly. She's insecure and she's loud about it. The best thing you can do is be a mirror. Be so calm and professional that her behavior looks even more ridiculous reflected back at her. You're like a warrior nun, Somi said, in awe. Emir almost smiled. Just get the bread to table 4. She returned to Seraphil and Matthew. They were in the middle of a quiet, intense argument. Don't care if Arthur Harrison is here, Matthew. You haven't looked at me once. This is our night, Seraphil was hissing. This night, Matthew hissed back, his voice low and dangerous, is paying for your Valentino dress and your white Tesla. This night is about my company. This one meeting with EV Capital is everything. So please, for one evening, can you not be... You? The barb hit its mark. Seraphil's face went white, then a dangerous, mottled red. She had been publicly slighted by her source of power. Her eyes darted around, looking for a target to deflect her humiliation onto. And there was Emir, standing patiently, menu in hand. What are you looking at? Seraphil spat. I was returning to take your order, ma'am, Emir said. You were eavesdropping, Seraphil accused, her voice rising to a near shout. I saw you, listening in on our private conversation. Ma'am, I assure you, I was only... You're probably hoping to sell gossip to the tabloids, aren't you? Is that how you make your extra tip money? Emir stood her ground. That is a serious and false accusation, ma'am. I must ask you to lower your voice. This was the final straw. For Seraphil, being told no by someone she considered a non-person was an act of aggression. "You must ask me," Seraphil said, her voice dropping to a theatrical, dangerous whisper. She stood up, knocking her chair back. The entire restaurant was watching now. The silence was absolute. "You," Seraphil said, jabbing a finger at Emir's chest, "are a servant. You don't ask anything. You do as you're told." "Seraphil, sit down," Matthew ordered, his face ashen. He saw the phones coming out. He saw the senator at the next table watching with open disgust. But Seraphil was beyond reason. She was in a blind rage, fueled by champagne and her own deep-seated worthlessness. "You come over here," she seethed, "with your smug little face, thinking you're better than me. You think because I'm loud, I'm stupid. You think you're so smart?" "Ma'am, please," Emir said, taking a small step back. "Don't ma'am me," Seraphil shrieked. And then she did the unforgivable. She grabbed the full glass of iced water from the table, the expensive, processed glacier water, and threw it. The water hit Emir square in the chest. Ice cubes cascaded down the front of her black dress, soaking her to the skin. A collective, horrified gasp echoed through the room. Emir simply closed her eyes for a brief second. The cold was a shock, but the humiliation was a familiar, dull ache. She didn't move. She didn't flinch. This composure, this dignity, was what broke Seraphil's mind. She couldn't stand it. She couldn't stand that she had thrown water on a waitress, and the waitress still looked more powerful than she did. "Wipe that smirk off your face," Seraphil screamed. She lunged forward. She grabbed the collar of Emir's soaked dress, her red nails digging into the fabric. "Ma'am, do not touch me," Emir said, her voice now dangerously low. "Or what? You'll serve me to death?" And with a final, furious grunt, Seraphil pulled. "Ripe!" The sound was shockingly loud in the silent room. It was definitive. Time seemed to stop. The ripping sound echoed, a sonic boom of violation. Emir looked down. Her dress, the simple black uniform, was torn. But it wasn't a small rip. Seraphil, in her rage, had grabbed the neckline and pulled downward with all her strength. The fabric had given way from her collarbone, diagonally across her chest, all the way down to her waist. The front of her dress gaped open, held together only by the seam at her hip. Her soaked black bra and the pale skin of her stomach and ribs were completely exposed to the 100 or so wealthiest people in the city. A wave of icy cold, not from the water but from pure, unadulterated shock, washed over her. She felt the eyes, 100 pairs of eyes, staring, judging, pitying. She saw the flashes, phones held up discreetly, capturing the moment. Tomorrow, a waitress would be humiliated on a gossip blog. Seraphil Reed stood panting, her chest heaving, her fist still clenched around the torn-off piece of black fabric. She looked at her hand, then at Emir, and a slow, vicious smile spread across her face. "That's what you get," Seraphil spat, her voice dripping with venom. "You and your cheap polyester rag. You should thank me. Now maybe they'll buy you one that isn't completely flammable." Emir's training, her composure, her years of boardroom negotiations, it all vanished. In that moment, she wasn't Evie Capital. She was a 27-year-old woman, half-naked and soaked in a room full of strangers, being laughed at by her tormentor. She instinctively crossed her arms, trying to cover herself, a gesture of such profound vulnerability that it made the act seem even more violent. Matthew Thorne finally snapped to action. He leaped from his chair, his face a mask of pure terror. "Seraphil, my God, what did you do?" "I taught her a lesson," Seraphil shrieked, energized by the drama. "She was mocking me, weren't you?" I... Emir couldn't find her voice. The humiliation was a physical weight, pressing the air from her lungs. "Ms. Reed!" Davis, the restaurant manager, was suddenly there, his face white with fury. He was flanked by 2 large security men who were usually posted, unseen, by the kitchen entrance. "You will leave, now. I'm not going anywhere," Seraphiel scoffed, throwing the piece of fabric onto the floor. "I am a guest. She is the one who should be fired. She threatened me. She provoked me. Get me your boss. Get me the owner of this dump. Now. I will have her fired and arrested." "The police are already on their way, ma'am," Davis said, his voice trembling with controlled rage. He turned to Amia, his eyes full of panic. "Ms. Vance, I'm so sorry." He was apologizing to his boss, but Seraphiel heard it as him apologizing to Vance, the waitress. "Yeah, you should be sorry, Davis," Seraphiel sneered. "And you," she pointed at Amia, "go cry in the kitchen and get me a real waitress, and a new bottle of champagne, this one's on the house, for my trouble." She actually sat back down in her chair. She crossed her legs, picked up her menu, and fanned herself, as if she had just concluded a minor, unpleasant business transaction. She was the queen of her own warped reality, and she had just won. Matthew stood frozen, his world collapsing in slow motion. He wasn't looking at Seraphiel. He wasn't even looking at Amia. He was staring, with an expression of dawning, apocalyptic horror, at the restaurant's entrance. A man was standing there, flanked by the doorman. He was in his late 60s, with a shock of silver hair and a suit of such impeccable, quiet quality that it made everyone else in the room look like they were wearing costumes. He radiated an aura of absolute, unshakable authority. It was Arthur Harrison, the sole public-facing board member of EV Capital, the man Matthew had been praying he would run into, the man who held his entire future in his hands. Arthur Harrison's eyes swept the room. He saw Seraphiel preening at the table. He saw Matthew frozen in terror. And then he saw Amia, shivering, clutching the rags of her uniform to her chest. Arthur's face, usually so placid and grandfatherly, darkened into something Matthew had only seen once before, in a hostile takeover that had bankrupted a competing tech firm. "Matthew," Arthur Harrison said, his voice quiet, yet it cut through the room like a razor. "What is going on here?" Matthew couldn't speak. He just opened and closed his mouth, a fish gasping for air. Seraphiel, however, saw the expensive suit and the air of authority, and assumed he was an ally. She stood up again, smiling. "Oh, thank goodness. Someone in charge. This waitress," she said, pointing at Amaya. "She spilled water all over me. She was incredibly rude, and she threatened me. I had to defend myself." Arthur Harrison didn't even look at Seraphiel. His entire focus was on Amaya. He walked past Matthew. He walked past Seraphiel's table. He walked right up to Amaya, who was standing there, tears finally welling in her eyes, not from sadness, but from pure, blinding rage. The most powerful venture capitalist in the Northern Hemisphere stopped directly in front of the humiliated waitress. He shrugged off his own $1,000 custom-made Xenia jacket and, with a tenderness that shocked the entire room, he wrapped it around Amaya's shoulders, shielding her from view. "Miss Vance," Arthur Harrison said, his voice soft with concern. "Are you all right?" Seraphiel Reed's smile froze and shattered. Her brain snagged on the name. Ms. Vance. Not Amia. Not Waitress. Ms. Vance. Who is Ms. Vance? Seraphiel stammered, looking at Matthew. Matthew looked as if he had just seen a ghost. He was staring at Amia, really looking at her for the first time, the quiet waitress, the woman with the intelligent, observant eyes. Vance. "Oh my God," Matthew whispered, taking a step back. "No, It can't be. Emir looked up, past Arthur, her eyes locking on Matthew. She clutched the jacket around herself. Her voice was hoarse, but it was clear. "Hello, Arthur," she said. "I'm afraid my undercover experiment has come to an abrupt end." The silence in Aura was no longer just quiet. It was a vacuum, sucking all the air and sound from the room. Seraphil Reed's face had gone from a victorious smirk to a mask of slack-jawed confusion. "Undercover?" Seraphil repeated, her voice a shrill squawk. What do you mean? Arthur? Who is this? Is she your mistress or something?" Arthur Harrison turned his head slowly, fixing Seraphil with a look of such profound, icy contempt that she physically recoiled. "Ms. Reed," he said, "you would be wise to stop talking. Permanently." He then turned to Davis, the restaurant manager, who was standing nearby, looking like he was about to faint. "Davis, please call the police. We wish to press charges for assault, battery, and willful destruction of property." "On me!" Seraphil shrieked, her voice cracking. "You can't! She assaulted me! I told you! Matthew, tell him! Tell him!" All eyes swung to Matthew Thorne. He was pale, his skin clammy. He was vibrating with a panic so deep it was visceral. He knew. The pieces were slotting into place with the sickening, final click of a coffin lid. Vance. Arthur Harrison. EV Capital. He had read the articles. The mysterious, anonymous founder of EV Capital. The ghost of Wall Street. No photos. No interviews. Just a name. E. Vance. He looked at Emir, who was now standing, wrapped in Arthur Harrison's jacket, looking not like a victim, but like a queen who had just been momentarily inconvenienced by a gnat. "Ms. Vance," Matthew stammered, his voice barely a whisper. "As in, E. Vance?" Emir simply stared at him. She didn't need to answer. It was Davis, the restaurant manager, who sealed the coffin. He bowed his head slightly toward Emir. "Ms. Vance, what are your orders for the restaurant? Shall we close for the evening?" The room exploded in a collective, unified gasp. This was the first reveal, the first domino to fall. Seraphil's brain, fogged by champagne and arrogance, struggled to keep up. "Orders? Your orders? Davis, what are you talking about? She's a waitress." Davis looked at Seraphil, and for the first time, he dropped his professional mask. His face was pure, unadulterated disdain. "This is Ms. Emir Vance," he said, his voice projecting to every corner of the room. "She is not a waitress. She is the founder of the Vance Hospitality Group. She is the woman who signs my paychecks. She is the owner of Aura." If the sound of the dress tearing had stopped time, this revelation shattered it. Seraphil Reed's world tilted. The blood drained from her face, leaving her looking sallow and sick beneath her expensive makeup. "Owner? You own this restaurant?" She let out a choked, hysterical laugh. No, that's impossible. She's poor. Look at her." "I was," Emir said, her voice cutting through Seraphil's hysterics. It was the first time she had spoken directly to her attacker since the assault. Her voice was no longer that of a polite server. It was the voice of a CEO, the voice of the boss. "I was poor. I grew up in a foster home not 10 miles from here. I scrubbed floors and, yes, I waited tables to put myself through college. I built this restaurant and the 50 others in my portfolio from nothing." She took a step forward, clutching the jacket. "I was working here tonight to remember what that felt like, to see if the standards I set were being met, to see if the people I hired were as good as I believed them to be." She glanced at Davis and Somi, who was watching from the service station with tears in her eyes. "They are." She then fixed her gaze back on Seraphil. And I was reminded, she said, her voice dropping, of what it feels like to be treated as less than human by people like you. Seraphiel was crumbling. This was bad. This was very bad. She had assaulted the owner of one of the most exclusive restaurant groups in the country. She would be banned. Her friends would find out. This was a social death sentence. "Matthew!" she cried, grabbing his arm. "Matthew, fix this. You can fix this. Tell her we'll pay for the dress. We'll buy the restaurant." This was perhaps the stupidest possible thing she could have said. Matthew Thorne didn't hear her. He was trapped in a nightmare far, far worse than his girlfriend's. He wasn't thinking about a restaurant. He was thinking about Thorne Dynamics. He was thinking about his company, his $80 billion valuation, his legacy. He was thinking about EV Capital. He looked at Arthur Harrison, his boss on the board. He looked at Emiya Vance, the waitress who owned the board. "You're not just Vance Hospitality," Matthew whispered, the realization dawning on him like a death sentence. "Are you?" Emiya's eyes were like chips of steel. "I'm afraid I don't know what you mean, Mr. Thorne." "Oh, she knows," Arthur Harrison said. He had a small, grim smile on his face. "Matthew, you've been chasing a ghost for 6 months. You've been flooding my inbox, desperate for a meeting, begging for a final round of funding to save your company from that hostile takeover by Apex." The meeting," Matthew stammered. "The 9 a.m. tomorrow, with the board of EV Capital." "Yes," Arthur said. "That meeting." He gestured with an open palm toward Emiya. "Matthew Thorne, may I formally introduce you to your boss? This is Ms. Emiya Vance, the founder, CEO, and sole managing partner of EV Capital. She is the board. She holds 51% of your company's voting stock. She is the woman you've been calling the Waitress. And she is the only person on Earth who can decide whether Thorne Dynamics still exists on Friday." The second reveal landed with the force of a nuclear bomb. The entire restaurant, filled with the city's power players, understood exactly what this meant. This wasn't just a socialite assaulting a waitress. This wasn't even a socialite assaulting a restaurant mogul. This was a woman who had, for all intents and purposes, just assaulted the Federal Reserve. Seraphiel Reed, however, still didn't get it. Her world was small. It consisted of brands, gossip, and Matthew's black Amex. "EV Capital?" she said, her voice small and confused. "Matthew, what is that? Is that like a bank?" "It's everything," Matthew breathed. He was hyperventilating, his hands clenched at his sides. "Seraphiel, you idiot! You effing idiot! EV Capital. It's my company. It's me. She owns me." The stark, desperate admission hung in the air. She owns me. Seraphiel's face, which had been a mask of confusion, finally crumpled into pure, unadulterated terror. The intricate web of her life, the condo, the cars, the clothes, the status, was all funded by Matthew, and Matthew was funded by her, the woman whose dress she had just ripped in half. "No," Seraphiel whispered, shaking her head. "No, that's not funny. You're lying. It's a trick." She looked at Emiya, her eyes pleading for the first time. You're not. You can't be." Emiya simply watched her. She offered no comfort, no denial. She just let her own identity sit in the room, a massive, unmovable fact. "Oh, it's very real, Miss Reed," Arthur Harrison said, enjoying this far more than he should. "Ms. Vance founded EV Capital with the settlement she won from a bank that discriminated against her. She turned $15,000 into $5 trillion in assets under management. She owns the bank that holds your mortgage. She owns the company that made your phone. And she owns the man who pays for your Valentino dress." Seraphiel's legs gave out. She sank back into the chair, her breath coming in short, ragged gasps. She looked at her hands, the ones with the red nails, the ones that had just sealed her fate. She had flown too close to the sun, and the sun, it turned out, had been serving her champagne. At that moment, 2 uniformed police officers walked into the restaurant. They were large, calm, and utterly unimpressed by the wealth in the room. They conferred quietly with Davis, who pointed a shaking finger at Seraphil and then at Emir. One of the officers, a woman with a no-nonsense face, approached the table. "Ma'am," she said to Seraphil, "we've received a report of an assault. I'm going to need you to come with us." This snapped Seraphil out of her stupor. The reality of jail cut through her panic. "No, you can't arrest me," she shrieked, her voice echoing with the familiar, spoiled petulance. "I'm Seraphil Reed. This is a misunderstanding. She attacked me." The officer sighed. "Ma'am, we have about 50 witnesses here who say otherwise, and I believe several of them have video." Seraphil's head whipped around. She saw the senator, his phone now quite obviously pointed at her. She saw the old money heir also filming. She was trapped. She turned to her only lifeline, her last resort. "Matthew!" she screamed, lunging for him, grabbing the sleeve of his Tom Ford suit. "Matthew, do something! You're Matthew Thorne! Tell them! Tell them who you are! Tell them who I am!" Matthew Thorne stood frozen. He was watching his life play out in his mind. The headlines, the Forbes article, "CEO's girlfriend assaults primary investor." The stock, THRN, plummeting. The emergency board meeting. The vote of no confidence. The Apex takeover. His name reduced to a punchline at Davos. He saw his entire empire, built on code and ambition, about to be dismantled because of a $5,000 dress and a glass of water. He looked at Seraphil, her face streaked with tears and mascara, her hands clawing at him. She was no longer a trophy. She was an anchor, dragging him to the bottom of the ocean. He made a choice, the only choice a man like him could make. He yanked his arm out of her grasp, his movement so violent it sent her stumbling back. He looked at the police officer, his face a mask of cold, calculated detachment. "I don't know this woman," Matthew Thorne said, his voice clear and steady. The betrayal was so sudden, so total, that it sucked the sound from Seraphil's lungs. She stared at him, her mouth open in a silent scream. "Sir?" the officer asked, confused. "I said," Matthew repeated, straightening his suit. "I don't know her. She came to my table. She seemed unstable. She started shouting. I've never seen her before in my life. I have no idea who she is." Seraphil Reed let out a sound. It was not a word. It was a guttural, wounded noise, the sound of a person whose entire reality had just been ripped away, far more violently than any dress. "Matthew?" she whispered, her voice broken. "Matthew, please. We live together. You love me." Matthew wouldn't look at her. He kept his eyes fixed on the officer, his expression one of a concerned, innocent bystander. "Officer, she's clearly unwell. Please get her some help, and get her away from me." He had made his calculation. He would paint Seraphil as a hysterical, unknown assailant. He would cut her loose, sacrifice her completely, and beg Emir Vance for mercy. It was a slim chance, but it was the only one he had. Seraphil collapsed. She fell to her knees, sobbing, a heap of red Valentino and ruined dreams. "You liar!" she screamed, her voice muffled by her hands. "You liar, you bastard! You told me you loved me this morning. You promised me." The officers, seeing a situation now completely out of control, moved in. "Ma'am, you need to come with us. Now." They began to lift her by her arms. Matthew turned, satisfied to face Emir. He was about to start his apology, to craft the narrative of his own victimhood. He would be the man who was just as shocked as she was by this crazy woman. But Emir Vance held up a single hand. "Stop." Her voice wasn't loud, but it cut through the room. The officers paused. Seraphiel paused, her sobs hitching. Matthew froze. Emir took a step forward, the oversized Xenia jacket swishing around her. She looked, for a moment, like a barrister in a robe. She looked past Seraphiel, past the police, and locked her eyes onto Matthew Thorne. Her gaze was not angry. It was not hurt. It was infinitely worse, disappointed. "That was a pathetic move, Matthew," she said, her voice quiet. "And a stupid one." Matthew's blood ran cold. "You're right about one thing," Emir continued. "She is unstable, she is violent, and she is a liability." She then glanced down at the weeping woman on the floor. "But she is your liability, not a stranger." She turned her attention to the female officer. "Officer, I am Emir Vance. I am the victim of the assault. I wish to press full charges against Ms. Seraphiel Reed." Seraphiel wailed. "However," Emir continued, her eyes snapping back to Matthew, "your witness here, Mr. Thorne, is lying. He's committing perjury before you've even gotten him to the station." The officer looked at Matthew, her brow furrowed. "Sir." "Mr. Thorne," Emir said, her voice dropping to a conversational, deadly tone. "You and I both know you've been living with Ms. Reed for 2 years. Your security detail, which is parked outside, is managed by a firm that I happen to own a controlling stake in. I have the receipts for the flowers you sent her this morning. I have the digital footprint of your Tesla purchase, the one she was demanding earlier. You didn't just meet her. You created her." Matthew's face went from pale to a sickly, greenish grey. He was trapped. Utterly, completely trapped. He had tried to play chess with a grandmaster, and she had seen his move 10 steps ago. "So here is your choice, Matthew," Emir said, closing the checkmate. "Option A. You stick to your story. You lie to this officer. I then make one phone call to the DA, provide my evidence of your perjury, and you are arrested with her for filing a false report and obstruction of justice. Your career is over. Your company is absorbed by Apex before you even make bail, and I will make sure they set it high." She let that hang in the air. The room was so quiet, you could hear the ice melting in the abandoned water glasses. "Or," Emir continued, "Option B. You tell this nice officer the truth. You give a full, detailed witness statement. You explain that your girlfriend, Ms. Seraphiel Reed, in a fit of jealous rage, physically assaulted me. You will be her primary witness. You will be tied to this incident, publicly and permanently. Your reputation will be damaged, but you will not have committed a crime." She smiled, a cold, thin smile that held no humor. "You will, however, still have your 9 a.m. meeting with me tomorrow, and we will still be discussing the future of your company. What's it to be, Matthew?" It was no choice at all. It was a public execution, and she was just asking him to pick the blade. Matthew Thorne stood there for a long, agonizing 10 seconds. The tech visionary, the man on the cover of Wired. He looked at Seraphiel, who was staring up at him, her eyes a desperate, begging plea. He looked at Emir, the woman who held the strings to his entire universe. He visibly deflated. The ambition, the arrogance, the shark-like energy, it all drained out of him, leaving a hollow, defeated shell. He turned to the police officer. His voice was a dry croak. She's my girlfriend," he whispered. "Her name is Seraphiel Reed. I saw everything. She threw the water. She tore her dress." Seraphiel let out a final, agonizing scream of betrayal. This was worse than his lie. This was the truth, used as a weapon to save himself and condemn her. "Thank you for your honesty, Mr. Thorne," the officer said, her voice heavy with disgust for him. She and her partner lifted Seraphiel, who was no longer fighting, to her feet. Seraphiel was vacant, her eyes dead. "Ms. Reed, you are under arrest for assault and vandalism," the officer said, cuffing her hands behind her back. "You have the right to remain silent." As they read Seraphiel her rights, she was led past Matthew. She stopped, just for a second. She looked at him, her face a mess of tears and mascara. "I hate you," she whispered, her voice raw. "I hate you." Matthew couldn't meet her gaze. He just stared at the floor as the woman he'd promised to love was led out of his life, and out of the restaurant, in handcuffs. The doors of Aura closed behind the police officers and the disgraced Seraphiel Reed. The silence that remained was heavy and sour. The night's magic was broken, the ambience shattered. Diners began to quietly ask for their checks, their eyes averted, eager to flee the wreckage. Davis and the staff moved with quiet efficiency, trying to restore order to a room that had seen far too much reality. Emia stood for a moment, still wrapped in Arthur's jacket. She was suddenly exhausted. The adrenaline was fading, leaving behind a deep, bone-weary ache. The cold from the ice water had seeped into her skin. Arthur put a hand on her shoulder. "Let's get you home, Emia." "In a minute," she said. She had one last piece of business. She turned to Matthew Thorne, who was still standing by the table, a pariah in his own kingdom. He was the last diner left. He looked up at her, his eyes hollow. "Miss Vance," he began, his voice hoarse. "Emia, I'm so deeply sorry. I had no idea. She's not, I'm not, this isn't who I am." Emia had to resist the urge to laugh. "This isn't who I am." It was the anthem of the powerful when they were caught. "Who are you, Matthew?" she asked, her voice genuinely curious. "Are you the man who sat there silently while she humiliated a member of my staff? Are you the man who tried to abandon her to save his own skin? Or are you the man who, only when cornered, finally told the truth to save his company?" I panicked, he stammered. "I saw my life, my company, everything I've built." "What you've built," Emia interrupted, her voice gaining a sharp edge. "What you've built, Mr. Thorne, was built on my capital. It was built on my faith in a 20-something engineer I thought was going to change the world. I funded you when you were nothing but a blueprint and a garage. I was your EV capital." This was a new blow. He had always assumed EV capital was old money, a faceless fund. You were my seed investor?" he whispered. "I was," Emia said. "I saw you pitch. I believed in you. And I have spent the last 8 years watching the man I believed in disappear, replaced by this." She gestured at his suit, the room, the mess. "A man who dates women like Seraphiel Reed. A man who values his stock price more than his own integrity." She walked closer, stopping just a foot from him. "You sat there and let her call me trash. You let her tear my clothes. You didn't defend me when you thought I was a waitress. You only defended yourself when you found out I was your boss. That's the part I can't forgive." Matthew flinched as if she had slapped him. "Please," he begged. "I'll do anything. I'll fire myself. I'll donate to charity. Just, please don't let Apex take over. Don't destroy the company. It's my life's work." Emia looked at him, a long, appraising stare. She saw the terrified boy behind the CEO mask. "The company is sound," she said, her voice turning clinical, all emotion gone. "Your tech is revolutionary. It's you who is the liability. You and the culture of arrogance you've clearly fostered. The one that allowed you to think Seraphiel's behavior was just a minor inconvenience." She turned away from him, a clear dismissal. "The 9 a.m. board meeting is still on," she said, her back to him. "But it is no longer about a new round of funding. It is about your future as CEO." Will I have a future?" he asked, his voice small. Emir paused at the door. "That depends, Matthew. It depends on whether you come to that meeting as the man who built a company in a garage, or the man who just tried to lie to a police officer." She didn't wait for a reply. She and Arthur Harrison walked out the main door, leaving Matthew Thorne alone in the center of the empty, ruined dining room. A king with no castle, no queen, and no power. He sank into the chair Seraphiel had occupied, put his head in his hands, and for the first time in his adult life, Matthew Thorne wept. The next morning, at 8:45 a.m., the glass and steel lobby of Thorne Dynamics was buzzing. The gossip from Aura had spread through the digital veins of the city at light speed. The videos were everywhere. Seraphiel tear. Boss Waitress. The stock, THRN, had plummeted 38% in pre-market trading. The board was in a panic. Matthew Thorne arrived, looking like a ghost. He hadn't slept. His eyes were red-rimmed, his suit rumpled. He ignored the whispers of his employees and took the private elevator to the 50th floor boardroom. The room was already full. The entire board was there, including a grim-faced Arthur Harrison at the head of the table. The seat next to him, the chair for the representative of EV Capital, was empty. Matthew took his seat. The room was silent. "As you know," Arthur began, his voice grave, "we have a serious crisis. Last night, an incident involving our CEO." "A crisis of my making," Matthew interrupted. The board members looked at him, surprised. Matthew stood up. He looked haggard, but his voice was clear. "I'm not going to make excuses. What you saw on those videos was accurate. I sat by while a woman was humiliated. I was a coward. I was arrogant. And I put this company at risk. I failed." He took a deep breath. "I failed the company. I failed the board. And I failed our primary investor, who believed in me from day one." He looked at the empty chair. "I tender my resignation, effective immediately." A stunned silence filled the room. Arthur Harrison watched Matthew, his expression unreadable. Right at 9 a.m., the boardroom doors opened. It was Emir Vance. She was not the woman from last night. Gone was the black dress, the severe bun, the quiet server. This Emir Vance was breathtaking. She wore a sharply tailored suit of navy blue, her dark hair flowing over her shoulders in a powerful, sleek cascade. Her eyes were bright and alert. She carried a leather portfolio, and she moved with the silent, predatory grace of a panther. She was, in a word, the boss. She walked to the head of the table and placed her portfolio in front of the empty chair. She didn't sit. "I do not accept your resignation, Mr. Thorne," she said. Matthew looked at her, shocked. "But, after last night—" "Last night," Emir said, addressing the room, "I saw a man who had lost his way. A man so blinded by success that he forgot the principles on which he built his company." She turned to Matthew. "But just now, I saw a flicker of the man I first invested in. The man who wasn't afraid to admit he had failed." She looked around the table. "Thorne Dynamics is not just Matthew Thorne. It is 10,000 employees. It is a technology that is saving lives. I will not let the stupid, abhorrent actions of two insecure people destroy that. Apex is not taking this company." The board let out a collective, quiet sigh of relief. "But," Emir said, her voice turning to steel, "there will be consequences, major ones." She looked at Matthew. "First, You will be suspended as CEO for 6 months, without pay. Your entire salary and bonus package for the year will be donated to a network of shelters for women. Matthew nodded. Yes, ma'am. Second, she continued, you will enter mandatory, intensive therapy and anger management. Not for the press. For you. I want the man back, not the monster. Matthew nodded again. Understood. Third, she said, while you are suspended, I will be stepping in as interim CEO. This got a gasp from the board. I will be running this company from this office, Emir said. I will be conducting a full audit of the company culture, and when, or if, Matthew returns, it will be to a company that values integrity as much as it values innovation. She finally sat down, the picture of absolute control. Are there any objections? No one spoke. Good, Emir said. She opened her portfolio. Now let's talk about the Q4 projections. We have a lot of work to do, and we have a stock price to fix. For the next 2 hours, Emir Vance dissected their financials, identified 3 new market opportunities, and restructured their entire R&D pipeline. She was brilliant, ruthless, and in complete command. Matthew watched, a strange mix of shame and awe on his face. He had been so busy playing king, he forgot what a ruler looked like. As for Seraphil Reed, she was released on $50,000 bail. She returned to the condo to find her key fobs deactivated and her belongings in black trash bags in the lobby. She was facing 2 felony charges. The videos had made her infamous. No brand would touch her. No party would invite her. She was, in a single night, erased from the world she had tried so hard to belong to. Emir Vance left the boardroom that afternoon, her phone buzzing. It was a text from Somi, the waitress from Aura. Emir smiled and typed a reply. She put her phone away, stepping into the elevator, ready for her next meeting. The boss was in, and she was just getting started. And that's how a single moment of cruelty, the sound of a dress tearing, brought an entire empire to its knees and revealed the power hiding in plain sight. Seraphil Reed learned that the person you step on while you're climbing the ladder might just be the one holding the entire ladder up. And Matthew Thorne learned that true power isn't about the title or the money. It's about integrity, something he'll have to earn back, one day at a time. What did you think of Emir's ultimate checkmate? Was it justice, or was it mercy? Let us know your thoughts in the comments below. We read every single one. If you loved this story of karma and consequences, please hit that like button, share this video with someone who needs to see it, and most importantly, subscribe to our channel for more real-life drama and powerful stories every single week. Click that notification bell so you never miss a moment.